I never imagined I would hear the words come from our own son. Don't make a sound. His hand was firm on my shoulder, cold in a way that made my stomach turn. Behind him, my husband's eyes met mine, wide with fear, and he whispered, almost reverently, "Pretend we're dead." And in that moment, teetering at the edge of the cliff, the world felt surreal, like some cruel dream I couldn't wake from. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, and all I could hear was the thud of my own heartbeat, loud, accusing, unstoppable. Earlier that morning, the house had been filled with warmth. I remember the smell of fresh coffee, the way sunlight pooled across the kitchen floor, and the clatter of breakfast dishes as our son laughed at some private joke with his father. There had been nothing unusual, nothing ominous, just the quiet, comforting rhythm of family life. I had kissed my husband goodbye for a hike along the cliffs, our son tagging along with a backpack slung over one shoulder. We joked, light and easy, about how clumsy I could be near edges, how his father would always grab me if I tripped. I never thought those jokes would echo like a premonition in the raw, chilling wind. We had been so close as a family, or so I thought. Our son, now 19, had always been quiet, thoughtful, the type to disappear into his own world, yet attentive, even loving. He would linger in doorways, listen to conversations, and sometimes, without words, make us feel seen in a way adults seldom can. My husband and I had often marveled at how gentle he was, how responsible beyond his years. That morning, I never imagined that same quietude could harbor something so dark. The hike had been meant to be an escape, a celebration of a small anniversary, the day we'd met on a whim decades ago. The trail wound along a narrow ridge, cliffs plunging to jagged rocks below, waves thundering against them. I remember feeling exhilarated, alive, the scent of wet moss and sea spray filling my lungs. My husband held my hand tightly, murmuring little anecdotes about our first apartment, our first fight, how we'd almost given up on love only to cling harder. Our son walked a few steps ahead, head down, headphones dangling, occasionally glancing back with a smile. It was only when the trail narrowed near the edge that the shift began. One moment, our son was joking about slipping on loose gravel. The next, he pushed. My feet scrambled, heart lodged in my throat, and I felt the sharp jolt of betrayal before gravity took over. My husband grabbed my wrist instinctively, shouting my name, and we both landed hard on the jagged earth, knees scraping, palms bleeding. Rocks bit into our skin. The world tilted. Time slowed. Pain mingled with shock. I tasted blood in my mouth, my hair whipping into my face. And there he was, our son, standing above us, eyes unflinching, a strange determination etched into his features. I wanted to scream, to plead, to beg him to stop, but my husband's whisper sliced through the chaos, "Pretend we're dead." His hand was still in mine, grounding me in this impossible moment. I remember thinking, in that split second, that everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust had shattered. I had raised him, fed him, celebrated every small victory and wiped away every tear. How had it come to this? How could the boy who once held my hand while I cried over burnt bread now push us to our deaths, as if silencing us was the only way to assert himself? We lay still, listening to the wind and the distant crash of waves. Our son's footsteps faded behind a rock outcropping. I could hear his breathing, steady now, almost calm. My husband's fingers squeezed mine. "Stay quiet," he whispered again. His voice trembled, though his eyes were locked on mine with an intensity one had never seen. Survival was no longer instinct, it was strategy, silent and cold. And that's when the first thoughts of the impossible formed. Why? Why would our child betray us? Was it fear, anger, something darker? My mind raced through every memory, every argument, every missed birthday, every hug I had given him, searching for a clue I had missed. But nothing prepared me for the moment we understood, this was deliberate. Not accidental. Not a slip. He had meant to silence us. We had to move, but every shift of weight threatened to betray our position. The jagged rocks dug into our skin, blood mixing with dirt. My husband's hand never left mine, and I could feel the tremor in his body, though he forced his face into a calm mask, whispering reminders, breathe. Don't make a sound. Pretend we're gone. We were living in an awful liminal space, suspended between life and death, watching the child we loved as though he were a stranger, or worse, an enemy. And yet, amidst the fear, I felt a surge of clarity. We had survived until now. We had each other. And maybe, just maybe, we could turn this betrayal into a reckoning. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had lost its meaning, passed as we lay pressed against the cold, jagged cliffside. The wind shredded at our clothes and hair, but we stayed still, quiet as stones. My husband's hand in mine was a lifeline, his thumb brushing my knuckles, grounding me in reality. Every now and then, I could hear the distant snap of a twig, the soft crunch of earth under his boots. Our son was out there, somewhere, pacing, deciding what to do next. The boy I had nurtured, the child we had loved so fiercely, had turned into something unrecognizable. We weren't always like this, suspicious, tense, afraid of our own child. Life had been ordinary, quiet, filled with rituals that felt eternal. Morning coffee on the balcony, the scent of bacon sizzling in the pan, newspapers spread across the table, my husband humming under his breath as he read. Our son would shuffle in, hair messy, slippers scraping the floor, eyes still heavy from sleep, and grin at us like we were his favorite joke. Those were the days that felt invincible. He had always been sharp, more thoughtful than other kids his age. I remember him at 10, sitting by the window for hours, sketching strange landscapes with impossible trees. I would watch him in wonder, amazed at how his imagination spun worlds we couldn't see. But there were small shadows even then, a flicker of stubbornness, a flash of something secretive when we asked too many questions. At the time, we shrugged it off as teenage moodiness. Love made us blind. The first clue, I think, came much later. The little lies, the secret messages on his phone, the subtle ways he avoided our questions. He began locking his bedroom door, muttering excuses about homework, yet always seemed too alert, too aware of us watching. I tried to tell myself it was normal teenage behavior. But deep down, I felt a chill, a quiet fear I buried under pancakes, laughter, and bedtime stories. I remember the night it began to crystallize in my mind. He had been unusually quiet at dinner, picking at his food, and my husband had tried to make conversation. "Rough day at school?" he asked gently. Our son shrugged, eyes flicking toward the window, a slight tension in his jaw. Later, I saw his phone left unattended. A message notification popped up on the lock screen, "Make sure they don't interfere." My chest tightened. Surely, I thought, I was reading too much into it. I hoped I was imagining a darkness where none existed. But that hope died the day of the hike. The push, the cold calculation in his eyes, it was undeniable. And as we hid along the cliff, listening to his footsteps, I realized this wasn't a fleeting act of anger. It was premeditated. He had planned to silence us. I could see it in the way he moved, methodical, careful not to make a mistake that might expose him. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, painting the rocks in streaks of crimson and gold, he finally came close. My husband whispered, "Breathe. Move slowly." We inched backward, muscles tense, every nerve screaming. My palms burned from gripping rocks, my knees raw. My mind raced through scenarios, trying to imagine an escape without provoking him. And then he spoke, not a word of remorse, no hesitation, only chilling calm. "You can't stop me," he said, voice low, unnervingly steady. "You should have stayed out of it." His words, casual, matter of fact, cut deeper than any physical injury. That was the moment I understood. He wasn't just angry, he believed he was justified. There was no reasoning with him. Later, crouched together behind a boulder, we finally dared to whisper to each other. My husband's voice shook, but he forced calm. "We have to survive this," he said. "We have to understand why." I nodded, my head resting against his shoulder, feeling the wet moss prick my cheek. Survival was instinct, yes, but we also needed answers. And somewhere in that need for answers, I knew we would confront the truth, whatever it cost. As darkness fell, the wind howled like an animal, relentless and unforgiving. Yet within the chaos, a strange clarity settled over me. We had faced storms before, not like this, but still, storms. And we had survived. We were wounded, yes, but alive. And if we could get through tonight, if we could endure this betrayal, then maybe, just maybe, the daylight would bring a chance to reclaim what we had lost. And so, trembling, scraped, bleeding, we waited. Waiting became its own test of endurance, our bodies numb, our minds sharp with fear and observation. Every sound made us flinch. Every shadow made us hold our breath. And all the while, the boy we loved wandered somewhere above, carrying the weight of his choices, unaware that we were already planning how to meet them. Morning came, though it felt heavy, gray, almost wrong, as if the world itself had paused in recognition of what had happened. The wind had calmed, leaving a heavy silence that pressed against our ears. My husband and I moved slowly, careful to keep our injuries hidden, dragging ourselves along the cliff's edge where loose rocks still threatened to betray us. Every step hurt, every breath burned, but we were alive, and that was something. The first clue that led to the unraveling of everything came not from our son's words but from his absence. When he hadn't returned home the night before, I had tried to suppress the fear curling in my chest. My husband, always pragmatic, suggested he might have gone to a friend's, that teenagers sometimes vanish without warning. But deep down, I knew, just as I had known on the cliff, that this was different. There was a weight to the absence, a void that felt deliberate. Returning home under the guise of normalcy was a struggle. We moved silently through the rooms, dust motes dancing in the sunlight, our movements careful to avoid leaving traces of our injuries. The house smelled the same, the faint perfume of lilies in the vase on the counter, the lingering scent of last night's dinner, now cold. It should have comforted me, the ordinary smells, the familiar textures, but all I felt was unease. Small things began to pile up. A drawer left ajar, our son's phone lying on the counter, screensaver still lit, little betrayals that whispered, he's hiding something. I started noticing patterns I had ignored for years, missed phone calls, hushed phone conversations, sudden trips out of the house with vague excuses. At first, I tried to rationalize, to believe it was teenage secrecy, normal rebellion. But the memory of his hands on us at the cliff refused to fade. Then came the day I discovered the truth, though at the time, I didn't yet understand its full scope. I had gone into his room, ostensibly to collect his jacket for the day. His door was locked, as usual, but the lock had been forced slightly, a hairline fracture in its frame. My heart pounded as I pushed it open, and inside, I found a notebook, pages filled with meticulous planning, diagrams of the trail, notes on our routines, even sketches of the cliff. My breath caught. Each page was worse than the last, chronicling his thoughts, fears, and ultimately, his intent. He hadn't just acted out of anger or whim, it had been methodical. He had convinced himself we were obstacles to something, though what that something was, I couldn't yet fathom. The notebook ended with chilling finality, make them stay silent. No one can know. Not yet. I clutched the pages, feeling my chest tighten, and for a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My husband's words echoed in my head, pretend we're dead. I realized then that it had not only saved our lives but also bought us the time to understand the betrayal, to prepare. We weren't helpless, we were observers, gathering pieces before confronting the storm that had become our son. In the following days, tension escalated subtly. He returned home as if nothing had happened, smiling, brushing past us with casual familiarity. My stomach turned each time he spoke, each time I caught the flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. My husband and I exchanged glances, small nods, a silent communication honed by necessity. We had to learn his motives, understand the why behind such a profound act of betrayal. I began documenting everything, the missing items, the strange behaviors, the inconsistencies in his stories. I replayed every interaction, every glance, every argument in my mind. And slowly, a pattern emerged. It wasn't just fear or resentment driving him, it was something deeper, a misguided attempt at control, at asserting dominance over a life he thought constrained him. But why silence us? Why push us to the cliff? Those questions burned in me, unanswered, demanding confrontation. The discovery of the notebook changed everything. I stopped pretending ignorance, stopped suppressing my instincts. My husband and I devised quiet strategies, watching, listening, collecting evidence. Each gesture, each misstep, became a thread in the tapestry of truth we were unraveling. And beneath the fear, beneath the pain, a strange resolve took root. We were no longer victims, we were parents who had been forced to navigate betrayal at its most intimate. By the time our confrontation came, we were ready. Not with anger, not with screaming or threats, but with the full weight of knowledge, the careful understanding of his motives, and the clarity that only fear can bring. We had learned to move quietly, to watch, to wait, and to act with precision. And through it all, I kept returning to the cliff in my mind, to that single moment of betrayal. It had been a pivot, a terrifying incision in our lives that allowed us to see the truth. Every ache, every scar, every tremor in my body reminded me that we had survived, not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually. We were preparing for the reckoning. The confrontation didn't happen in a storm of yelling or dramatic accusations. It came quietly, over an ordinary dinner, the kind that had once been safe, familiar. Our son sat across from us, fidgeting with his fork, eyes darting between us as if testing the waters. My husband and I had rehearsed our words, not in a cold, calculated way, but carefully, like surgeons preparing for delicate work. I saw the notebook, I said softly, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. The words fell into the silence like stones. Our son froze, fork midway to his mouth, eyes wide. There was a flash of panic, or was it guilt, and I realized that, for the first time, he knew we had seen him. He tried to laugh it off. "It's just notes, nothing serious," he said, but his voice betrayed him. Too high, too quick. My husband leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low but firm. "We know what you were planning. We know about the cliff." The silence that followed was suffocating. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the scrape of a chair across the floor, they all sounded magnified, echoing in the small kitchen that had once been a sanctuary. And then, he started to cry. Not a soft whimper, but full, raw, unrestrained. I didn't mean to, his words trailed off, caught in the throat, but the shaking of his shoulders, the way he buried his face in his hands, told us everything. He hadn't meant to hurt us, not fully. It was fear, twisted logic, a desperate attempt to control something he couldn't. We listened, letting him unravel, letting the truth spill into the quiet room. He spoke of resentment he hadn't been able to articulate, of feeling trapped by our expectations, by the world, by his own fears. He confessed to the notebook, to the planning, to the push, though he insisted he hadn't meant for us to be seriously hurt. Every word was punctuated by tears, by guilt, by a trembling acknowledgement of how far he had gone. My husband reached across the table, hand on his son's trembling shoulder. "We love you," he said. "But love doesn't mean letting fear justify harm. You could have killed us." His voice cracked, the weight of years and pain and love intertwining. I added my own, quieter but no less firm, "We raised you. We trusted you. And still, we are here. But you need to understand, trust is not infinite. You broke it, and now you must make it right." Our son's eyes lifted then, red-rimmed and swollen, meeting ours. For the first time, I saw a flicker of recognition, of shame, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. He wasn't a villain in the cartoonish sense, he was human, flawed, desperate, scared. But human or not, he had acted with intent, and intent carries consequences. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension, conversations that skirted anger but plumbed the depths of understanding. We spoke of boundaries, of accountability, of the unthinkable act he had committed. He listened, sometimes weeping, sometimes defensive, but slowly, the cracks in his armor began to show. The betrayal had left scars, both visible and invisible. My arms still bore scratches from the cliff, my knees bruised and stiff. But the emotional scars ran deeper, the trembling of trust, the echo of fear, the realization that the person we loved most could, in a moment, become someone we feared. It took everything within me to separate the act from the child, to see not only the harm but the humanity. I think the most painful part was understanding the subtle ways he had justified it to himself. The rationalizations, the logic that twisted love into control, protection into domination. It was a reflection of something far larger, something parents rarely see in their children until the moment it is almost too late, the capacity for fear and desperation to override love. And yet, even in that darkness, I noticed small shifts. The way he avoided silence now, the way he sought connection, tentative and careful. The way he apologized, over and over, not just for the push but for the secrecy, the planning, the betrayal. Each apology was a thread, slowly mending the fabric of our family, though we were acutely aware some threads could never be fully restored. The betrayal had revealed the truth of his character, and in that revelation, I found clarity. Love alone cannot shield us from harm, nor can trust alone protect us from human failure. We had survived the cliff, yes, but we had also survived the awakening, understanding our son not as a villain, but as a human being who had made a choice we could never condone. After the truth was laid bare, my husband and I knew we had to act, not with anger or vengeance, but with careful, deliberate steps to protect ourselves and guide our son toward accountability. Survival at the cliff had been instinctual, now, survival meant navigating the fragile, fractured trust in our own home. We began by setting boundaries. He could no longer move freely around the house without regard for our safety. Doors were locked, phones monitored, not as punishment, but as precaution. Each rule was explained calmly, with patience yet firmly. My husband said, "We are not your enemies, but we cannot pretend the last few weeks didn't happen." I nodded, echoing the sentiment, watching my son's face as he processed the gravity of his actions. We also insisted on honesty. No more lies, no more hidden notes, no more secrecy. It wasn't easy. He resisted at first, defensive, tense, but gradually, under the weight of our insistence and the undeniable evidence, he began to open up. He spoke about fear, fear of failure, fear of being controlled, fear of not living up to expectations. And while I could empathize with that fear, I refused to let it justify violence. One afternoon, I sat with him at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of cooling tea, and asked him to explain what he felt at the moment he pushed us. He swallowed hard, eyes downcast. I felt trapped. I thought if you knew how scared I was, it would make you control me even more. His voice was small, vulnerable, raw. I didn't mean to. I didn't think. I placed my hand over his, feeling the tremor in his fingers. You did mean it, though. You made a choice to hurt the people who love you most. That is not a mistake you can simply undo. My husband joined, his voice firm but not cruel. Now we rebuild. You will have to earn our trust back. Every day. Every moment. It's not easy, and it will take time. We turned to small, deliberate steps to repair our family. Family counseling became a daily ritual, discussions held with honesty and calm reflection. He wrote letters of apology, not for show, but as a tool to confront his own actions. We engaged in exercises that emphasized empathy, accountability, and understanding the ripple effect of fear-driven decisions. Every session brought frustration, tears, and occasional setbacks, but also moments of progress, however tiny. Outside the walls of our home, we also began documenting everything for accountability. The notebook, photographs of the cliff, even my husband's detailed journal of our injuries and survival, all kept not as evidence for punishment, but as a reminder of the severity of what had happened. There was no hiding from the truth, and confronting it became a way for all of us to rebuild. And amidst it all, the emotional rhythm of our lives shifted. Small gestures, the careful smile he gave when making tea, the hesitance before speaking, the effort to be present, became markers of healing. Each act of responsibility, however minor, was a brick in the foundation we were rebuilding. We allowed him to demonstrate growth in tangible ways, always emphasizing the moral lesson: fear is never a justification for harm. But healing was not linear. There were days when resentment flared, when memories of the cliff and the betrayal resurfaced in vivid waves. My husband and I would exchange quiet glances, acknowledging the pain without letting it consume us. On those days, we leaned on each other, held on to the truth that survival meant not just being alive, but learning to navigate the human heart even when it had hurt us deeply. We also recognized that action meant accountability beyond the walls of our home. We involved trusted family members and counselors, ensuring that the patterns of secrecy and fear could not continue unchecked. Our son had to see the impact of his actions on others, not just on us, and understand the consequences in a broader moral context. Through all this, a quiet, resilient thread wove through our days, the understanding that love is tested, sometimes to the point of fracture, and that the only way to heal is with honesty, deliberate care, and the unwavering commitment to moral clarity. Our son had acted out of fear and desperation, but he could still choose a different path. And so, we acted, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with firm resolve and compassionate guidance. The truth, once carefully contained within the walls of our home, began to ripple outward. We hadn't sought attention. This wasn't about scandal, but some events could not remain private. Friends, neighbors, and extended family began to notice changes: the tense silences at gatherings, the bandaged scrapes we tried to hide, the quiet withdrawals of our son. Questions arose, and though we had tried to shield him, the reality of his actions became impossible to obscure. We decided to speak, cautiously and deliberately. Sitting around the dining table, we recounted what had happened, not sensationalized, not in anger, but with clarity and honesty. Our son made a grave mistake, my husband said. He acted out of fear, but that does not excuse what he did. We survived, but the consequences are real. I followed, emphasizing accountability and moral responsibility. We are sharing this not to shame him, but to show that actions have weight and that safety, trust, and love are not negotiable. The community's reaction was a mixture of shock, concern, and careful support. Friends called, neighbors checked in, and relatives offered guidance. Some were incredulous, struggling to reconcile the child they knew with the act he had committed. But most responded with empathy, not judgment, a recognition that families, like people, are complex, capable of both love and grave error. Within the family, consequences were immediate. Our son faced restrictions, curfews, monitored communication, structured routines to ensure accountability. He attended counseling not only for the act itself but for the underlying fears and resentments that had driven him. Teachers and mentors were informed, not to stigmatize, but to provide guidance and ensure he could navigate a path toward rehabilitation. Interestingly, the public acknowledgement also created a mirror. He saw the impact of his actions, not just on us, but on everyone around him. The fear, the concern, the whispered conversations, these were consequences no notebook or private planning could contain. And slowly, over weeks and months, I noticed a shift in him. His posture changed, shoulders less tense, eyes less guarded. He began to take responsibility in tangible ways, completing chores without reminder, offering apologies not prompted by questions, volunteering in small ways to rebuild trust. We were careful to balance discipline with guidance. Each step he took toward accountability was recognized, but never allowed to replace genuine moral understanding. We emphasized that redemption is not instant, that trust is earned day by day, and that love cannot coexist with repeated violations. There were setbacks, moments of anger or regression, but the consistent framework of accountability became a stabilizing force. Outside the family, life resumed its rhythms, but with altered texture. Conversations at work or social events carried the subtle awareness of what had happened, though most never knew the full scope. We spoke when necessary, carefully, always focused on the moral lessons: fear can distort judgment, secrecy can destroy relationships, and accountability is non-negotiable. People respected the honesty and courage it took to face such a betrayal, and in return, they offered quiet support, advice, and moral guidance. Even more striking was the change within our son. He began reflecting not just on his actions but on the broader consequences of fear-driven behavior. He understood that trying to silence others, no matter the perceived justification, is destructive, not only to relationships but to one's own moral compass. He began articulating remorse in ways that were tangible, apologizing to those he had lied to, correcting small harms, and, importantly, speaking openly in counseling about his thought processes. In the end, the public consequence was not humiliation but education, for him, for us, and, in some quiet way, for the community. It underscored a moral truth, that human beings are fallible, that actions carry weight, and that even deep betrayal can become an opportunity for reflection, correction, and eventual growth. We had survived the cliff, survived the push, and now we were witnessing survival of a different kind, survival of moral clarity, of accountability, and the slow rebuilding of trust. The consequences were visible, real, and sobering, but they were also the scaffolding upon which healing could begin. Healing came slowly, in small, quiet increments. At first, it felt almost impossible. The memories of that day on the cliff haunted every corner of my mind, the sound of our son's footsteps, the jolt of betrayal, the cold, whispered command to pretend we're dead. But over time, with patience and careful effort, the raw edges of fear began to dull. We started rebuilding routines, ones that reminded us of normalcy without erasing the lessons we had learned. Mornings returned to their gentle rhythm, the smell of coffee, the hum of the kettle, sunlight spilling across the kitchen table. Our son participated in these routines, slowly, tentatively, asking questions, listening, helping where he once would have shrugged. Each small gesture was a step toward reconnection. My husband and I spent time reflecting together, speaking in whispers during quiet evenings. We acknowledged our lingering fear, the ways the betrayal had reshaped us, but we also celebrated the resilience it had forged. "We made it through," he said one night, voice low and steady. And somehow, so did he. But now we must guide him with the lessons etched in that moment. I nodded, feeling both grief and relief mingling in my chest. Counseling continued, not as punishment, but as a scaffold for understanding. Our son began to articulate the roots of his fear, his insecurities, his need for control, the misunderstanding of love as something to manipulate rather than cherish. Listening to him, I could see the human being beneath the actions I had once feared. There was remorse, yes, but also awareness, a recognition of wrong and a desire to change. One day, months later, we took a slow walk along the same cliff trail where the incident had occurred. The sun warmed our shoulders, the wind was gentler, and I felt a sense of calm that had been impossible before. My son walked beside us, silent at first, then slowly began speaking about the moment he had almost destroyed us, about the fear that had driven him, and about the guilt that had weighed him down ever since. "I didn't understand love," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "I thought if I controlled everything, no one could hurt me. I was wrong." His words hung in the air, heavy but honest. My husband and I exchanged a glance, feeling the tentative threads of forgiveness beginning to weave between us. We didn't hug or make grand declarations. Healing isn't always dramatic. Instead, we walked, side by side, acknowledging pain, embracing responsibility, and recognizing that growth often arises from the harshest lessons. Over time, laughter returned, not the easy laughter of before, but one earned through survival and understanding. It was quieter, more reflective, but it carried warmth, reassurance, and the knowledge that we were moving forward. I began to see signs of change in him in daily life. He would check in before leaving the house, offer help without being asked, express thoughts and feelings with a level of honesty that had once seemed impossible. Trust, once fractured, was being rebuilt with patient, consistent actions. And in that process, I realized something profound. Even after deep betrayal, family can heal, but it requires truth, accountability, and the willingness to face uncomfortable realities with courage. Months passed, and the house, once a site of fear and suspense, became a place of reflection and learning. We marked milestones quietly, the first time he took responsibility without prompting, the first apology offered without tears, the first moment of open conversation without tension. Each small victory mattered. Most importantly, I learned to separate the act from the human. Our son had acted out of fear, yes, but he was not irredeemable. His remorse, his willingness to engage in moral reflection, and his efforts to change allowed the family to reclaim itself. Healing wasn't just about physical survival, it was about moral and emotional survival, about restoring integrity, trust, and love in the aftermath of a near tragedy. By the time the seasons shifted, the fear that had once dominated our lives had softened. We could remember that day at the cliff without our hearts pounding uncontrollably. We could speak of betrayal without anger dominating every word. And though the memory remained, it no longer ruled our lives, it informed them. We had survived, yes, but more importantly, we had learned that even in moments of profound human failure, redemption is possible, trust can be rebuilt, and love, tempered by experience, can endure. Sitting on the balcony one evening, the breeze carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, I found myself reflecting on everything we had endured. The scars, both visible and invisible, had softened but would always remain as reminders. Not just of the day our own son tried to silence us, but of the resilience, patience, and moral clarity it took to survive, not only physically but emotionally. I often ask myself, and now I ask you, the audience, what would you have done if someone you loved, someone you raised, turned against you so completely? Could you hold both love and accountability in your heart? Could you survive the betrayal without letting it destroy the very bond you once cherished? The truth is, life doesn't offer easy answers. Healing isn't a straight path, and forgiveness doesn't erase the past. But it does allow us to move forward, to rebuild trust, and to guide those who have faltered toward understanding and redemption. Our son still makes mistakes, he is still learning. But each day, we walk together in a fragile, tentative harmony, reminders that love and accountability can coexist, that survival is not only about escaping danger, but about confronting moral truths and growing stronger for it. As I sip my tea and watch the sun dip behind the hills, I carry a quiet hope that by sharing this story, someone else might see the power of patience, the necessity of boundaries, and the possibility of healing even after the most unimaginable betrayal. Life is fragile, human hearts are complex, and sometimes the greatest lessons come from surviving what we never thought we could. Would you have found the strength to endure? Would you have chosen forgiveness, accountability, or both? I invite you to reflect, share, and think deeply about the bonds that shape our lives, and the moral courage it takes to preserve them.